Welcome to ReadingBear. Today we've got a story where OP's boss bans overtime to save money and chaos erupts. Watch how compliance flips the script and triggers a mass walkout. I worked in operations for a mid-sized distribution center. We weren't glamorous. We moved other people's stuff from shelves to trucks and made sure it didn't get lost. My job was to balance schedules, fix broken scanners, jump in on the floor when someone called out, and put out the little fires that appear when 1,000 small things depend on each other. It was messy but honest. The team knew what they were doing, and as long as they had a workable plan and some overtime during crunch weeks, they made me look smart. The new boss arrived and decided we were all wasteful. He strolled through like he'd cracked the code of logistics by reading a slide deck. He pointed at a clock-in kiosk and said something like, "This is where the money goes." He didn't mean the equipment, he meant people. The rule he pushed was simple. No overtime. Not reduced, not limited, none. He said overtime was a crutch, and that high-performance teams meet goals inside the lines. He liked that phrase, inside the lines. He said if we couldn't hit targets inside the lines, we were the problem, not the plan. We tried to explain that demand didn't follow lines. Our orders spiked whenever a client ran a promo or a container finally cleared a port. Freight doesn't pause just because a schedule says it should. The boss didn't care. He wanted to show corporate a pretty graph, and the graph he chose was the payroll line. He wanted it flat. He announced new policies during a short stand-up he called an alignment huddle, like we were a sports team that only needed a pep talk. He made us all sign a clean piece of paper that said, in plain text, that any overtime had to be pre-approved in writing by him. No exceptions. No staying late 5 minutes to finish a pallet. No clocking out and volunteering. No coming in early to get a head start. If a truck arrived late, too bad. If the pick list exploded, too bad. If equipment went down, too bad. It wasn't just a signature. He attached a memo. Any employee who works beyond scheduled hours without prior written approval will be subject to corrective action. He also wrote that breaks must be taken exactly as scheduled and that any deviation would be considered insubordination. He loved that word, insubordination. I read that memo twice. It was a gift. I had spent a lot of my time being the helpful guy who stayed an extra 20 minutes so night shift wouldn't walk into a wall of chaos. I'd come in early when a refrigerated truck was delayed so we could get perishables stowed fast. Everyone did a little extra. Not because we were pushovers, but because when one person cut corners on time, someone else paid for it. Real life isn't clean. The memo changed everything. Not because I liked it, but because I understood the angle. If the boss wanted the lines, we could give him the lines. Perfect compliance. Exactly what he asked for, exactly how he wrote it, with the outcomes that lived on the other side. I gathered the leads in the break room and showed them the memo. I didn't make a speech. I just said, we follow this to the letter. No more heroics. Not 1 minute, not 1 second. One of the leads asked what would happen when a truck arrived late. I told him we'd stop at the scheduled time and lock the doors. If the carrier had to sit in the yard until the next day, that was the boss's graph to explain. We agreed on a few ground rules that matched the memo. Everyone clocks in at their exact start time. Not early. Everyone clocks out at their exact end time. Not late. Everyone takes the full break and lunch, down to the minute. No skipping, no shortening. Any request for overtime gets routed to the boss in writing with a time-stamped message from the scheduling system. If he doesn't approve in writing before the end of the shift, no one stays. If a task can't be finished within a shift, we leave it where it stands, tidy the area, and log what's undone in the system. The first day of perfect compliance looked neat. We hit our exact start time, we took our breaks at the exact minute, and we left the floor clean at the exact second the shift ended. The boss walked around with a clipboard, nodding like a coach who saw everyone running drills. He liked what he saw because everything looked controlled. Then the trucks got late. A carrier rolled in near the end of the shift with a mixed load that should have been unloaded and cross-docked right away. Old me would have yelled for a quick push, and we'd have done the work in 20 minutes of overtime. Newest watched the clock. When the minute struck, the team set down scanners, parked the pallet jacks, and clocked out. The boss saw people walking away and barked, "We need this trailer cleared." I held up my copy of the memo and asked if he had written approval for overtime. He didn't answer the question. He tried to say this was business critical. I pointed out the line that said no exceptions. He made the face bosses make when they realized the thing they wrote down was a trap. He told me to do what I had to do. I told him I would. Follow his policy. Then I left. The carrier had to sit. Night shift arrived. and found the dock quiet and a trailer with a seal still intact. Night shift didn't get overtime either. They worked their schedule, took their breaks, and left a neat dock with a sealed trailer still waiting. That trailer spent the night with us like an impatient guest who didn't bring pajamas. Next morning, the client called about a missed delivery window for some of their goods. The boss tried to talk around it. He said something about unexpected timing. They weren't warm. I heard the call in fragments because the office walls are thin. The second week brought an inventory count. Normally, we'd do it with extra hours, because counting everything while also moving orders takes more hands and more time. The boss said we didn't need overtime because he had a lean workflow. His lean workflow was one person with a scanner trying to do the math of 3. I told the leads to follow the policy. We counted what we could during scheduled hours and logged what we couldn't. At lunch, the counting stopped. At shift end, the counting stopped. I could see him building up pressure, like he wanted to tell us we were lazy. But the written policy was his handwriting, not ours. The errors started to show up, not because we were sloppy, but because you can't maintain speed, accuracy, and schedule with fewer hours than the work requires. If you force the time down, one of the other two goes up. No matter how many buzzwords you speak, reality always wins. We chose schedule and accuracy because his memo demanded the first, and our pride demanded the second. Speed suffered. He had a meltdown in his office the day a big client sent an email with the words penalty and breach. He called me in and gave me the classic speech about team players. I told him we were being the most compliant team he'd ever manage. I read the memo back to him line by line. He tried to say the memo was guidance, not a straitjacket. I repeated the line about no exceptions. He hated hearing his own words. This went on for a while. Perfect compliance doesn't create chaos right away. It starves chaos of the quiet goodwill that hides it. The little extra efforts we always spent to make things smooth vanished. The smoothness vanished with them. The team saw it. They weren't happy. No one likes watching their work look worse. Good people hate handing a problem off to the next shift. But they listened because they trusted me and because the memo was clear. We kept our notes detailed. Every incomplete task got a clean entry. Time, reason, number of pallets, where they were staged, which carrier was delayed, which system field showed a hold, which seal remained unbroken, who we notified, and when we notified them. We were precise because we knew how this game ends, with someone trying to blame the people on the floor for the plan that came from the office. The first real crack came with the weekend shift. Historically, weekend work was mostly overtime volunteers. It wasn't constant, but we used it to keep the pipeline from clogging. The boss decided to cancel weekend overtime entirely. He said we could build smart buffers instead. Buffers are nice on paper and useless when orders burst out of them. We watched as the backlog grew into a list that didn't fit on one screen. The carriers started arriving and leaving with empty trailers because their loads weren't ready. The dispatchers called in with annoyed voices. The client service team sat in a row, typing apologies. The boss discovered his next brilliant idea: flexing breaks. He announced that we would keep breaks inside the lines, but he wanted us to move the break windows constantly to match flow. He didn't ask. He ordered. The problem was, the memo said breaks would be taken exactly as scheduled, and he'd enforce that like a mantra. The schedule was published. If he wanted to change it, he had to publish a new one. That takes time, and in the time it takes, the old schedule is the one we follow. The day he tried to drag a lead off to a last-minute flex break, the lead handed him the schedule, pointed to the printed break time, and then pointed at the clock. The boss tried to call it insubordination, the same word he'd loved before. The lead said, "I'm literally following your policy," then took the break, exactly on time. The best part of perfect compliance is it looks polite. We weren't shouting. We weren't storming around. We were smiling and doing exactly what we were told to do. The absurdity revealed itself without us being dramatic. The tipping point was a client visit. They were a big one, the kind of client that fills 4 aisles with the same logo. They sent a small group to walk the process. I set up the standard route: receiving, staging, put away, picking, packing, outbound. I didn't hide anything. If we were going to get dinged, I wanted it to be honest. They saw the backlog in receiving. They saw the staged pallets labeled "Hold No Overtime." They saw picking tickets that were in progress with notes like "Paused at end of shift per policy." They asked me what policy. I handed them the memo. I didn't add commentary. I let them read the 3 lines that mattered, including the no exceptions part. The boss looked like he'd swallowed a thumbtack. He tried to run interference, but the client asked direct questions. They weren't rude. They were the calm kind of angry, which is worse. They asked what the plan was for the orders that were already outside their delivery window. The boss said something about process stabilization. They didn't like that answer. Near the end of the tour, the client asked me, quietly, how people felt. I told them staff morale was low because people wanted to do good work and felt they weren't allowed to. I showed them our logs, which documented every decision and every time we asked for approval to stay and finish. Those requests were time-stamped and unanswered. The client asked me to email them copies. I told them I'd have to ask the boss because they were technically internal. He said no. The client made a face that said they didn't need my email to make a decision. A week later, corporate had a call with the client. The next day, we got a message from corporate that used words like urgent, service level, and retention risk. The boss held a meeting where he told us to set aside the memo. He didn't put that in writing. He tried to be casual. Just do what it takes to keep the wheels turning. He said we all needed to pull together. I said I was happy to follow any written policy he issued. He stared at me like I'd just turned off the air. He knew the memo was now a legal document because we'd all signed it. If he wanted to reverse it, he'd have to eat his own words in writing. He refused. That was his pride fighting his survival. So we continued to follow the policy. Then the safety incident happened. Not a serious injury, thank whatever luck we had, but serious enough. A stack wasn't strapped right on a late-day move because the team had to stop for the end of shift. They parked it in a safe corner and logged the status, but a forklift operator from another zone tried to be a hero on his own time and nudged the stack. It slid into a guardrail. No one was hit, but the noise and the toppled pallets brought the safety manager on a run. She wrote an incident report that very clearly said the task should have been completed with 2 people, and those people had already clocked out. She wrote that they had asked for overtime and it wasn't approved. The safety manager didn't report to the boss. She reported to corporate safety. The incident report didn't care about politics. It cared about facts. The fact was, the policy made things worse. The boss decided to fix the culture. He started writing people up for attitude, which was his way of saying, I don't like being held to my own rules. He wrote up a picker who asked for clarification about a break window. He wrote up a receiver who closed the dock door at the end of shift while a trailer was still in the bay. He tried to write me up for leading resistance. I asked him to cite the policy I had violated. He couldn't. He hated that too. The team started coming to me one by one, asking if I thought it was time to leave. Not because they hated the work, but because they liked doing it right, and the place made that hard. I told them I wouldn't tell anyone to quit. I told them what I was doing, documenting everything. If corporate wanted to fix it, I'd stay. If they didn't, I'd go to a place where inside the lines wasn't a buzzword for pretend the world is simple. The moment arrived faster than I expected. The client we toured with pulled some of their volume and gave it to a competitor. Not all of it, but enough to hurt. Corporate sent a short note saying we had to write a recovery plan that included cost savings and service improvements. That's the corporate version of saying, we see the fire. Put it out without using water. The boss called a mandatory meeting and announced a new enforcement push, strict headcounts, cross-training, on the fly, and a brittle daily target that had no cushion. He said any talk of overtime would be negativity. He then ended with a line I won't forget. If you won't do it my way, there are plenty of people who want your job. I watched faces drop. People who gave years to that floor looked like someone had called them useless. The boss thought fear would make us sprint. What he didn't get is that fear makes people plan. 2 days after that meeting, a trickle turned into a stream. One of the best forklift drivers walked up to me and said he'd accepted an offer across town. Then a packer left, then a receiver. Each one had found something not glamorous but stable, another warehouse, a plant, a courier. The boss called them disloyal in the office. I called them smart in my head. I stayed for the moment because I wanted the ending to be clear. I didn't want to leave in a fog and have him spin a story about how we failed him. The actual walkout wasn't planned like a movie. It happened because the boss pushed a change to the timekeeping system without testing it, and half the team couldn't clock in. He told them to work anyway and said he'd fix the punches later. That was a violation of his own memo and also a labor law problem, the kind you don't mess with. People aren't supposed to work off the clock. He drilled that when he wanted to sound compliant, and now he wanted them to break it. I stood on the floor and said, Loud enough for the people nearby, but quiet enough not to be a scene. No one works off the clock. The team didn't. They stood by the wall. Some sat. The boss stormed out of his office, looked at the idle zone, and started barking about expectations. I asked him, in front of everyone, to put in writing that we were authorized to work beyond scheduled hours to make up for the system issue. He wouldn't. He told me I was creating a hostile environment. I pointed at the broken time clock and said, "That's the hostile environment. It steals people's pay." Someone laughed, not because it was funny, but because it was absurd. We waited. 10 minutes turned into 30, 30 into an hour. The clock was still broken. The boss wouldn't let anyone clock in manually because he had a rule about not backfilling timestamps. He wanted the system to be immaculate. The system did what systems do when you treat them like idols. It failed. Work didn't move. The dock was quiet. The carriers heard why and decided to leave and come back another day. I told the team I was going to HR, not to complain, to report a timekeeping issue as a compliance matter. HR doesn't like risk. Timekeeping risk is expensive. I brought my folder with a memo, printed time-stamped requests for overtime, logs of incomplete tasks, the safety incident report, and a list of people who had tried to clock in and couldn't. I didn't editorialize. I put the facts on the table. HR listened. They asked me to wait while they called the boss. He showed up with his red face and acted wounded, like I'd betrayed him by telling the truth. He said I should have come to him. I pointed out that I had, many times, in writing. He said I was being dramatic. HR didn't care about his adjectives. They cared about the paper. Then HR did something that ended the suspense. They told everyone to go home and return the next day, paid for the lost time. They said no one was to work off the clock under any circumstances, and if the system wasn't working, people would be paid for their scheduled hours by manual entry. They looked at the boss and told him to put any changes to policy in writing, send it to HR for review, and not to enforce anything that wasn't cleared. That night I decided I was done. Not because HR was wrong, they were right, but because the place had become a battle between the real and the imaginary. I wrote my resignation letter. It was short. I thanked the company for the opportunity, listed my last day, and attached a transfer of responsibilities draft with every open project and its status. I copied HR. I did not copy the boss. He got it anyway. The next morning, I came in early not to work, but to clear out my locker and say goodbye. People trickled in with the same look I'd had for weeks. A few pulled me aside and said they had offers. Two. One said she didn't, but she'd figure it out. I told her I'd help. I meant it. I gave my badge to HR. The boss asked to see me in his office. For once, I went. He asked me to reconsider and said we were turning a corner. I told him I didn't want to be there for the next corner. He said I was letting the team down. I said the team was strong without me and would be stronger somewhere else if things stayed the same. He told me I was making people leave. I told him people were leaving because they could count. I walked out to the parking lot and found a small group waiting. Not a dramatic crowd, just a handful of people from each area. They said they were leaving too, not in a few weeks. Now, not as a tantrum, as a decision. They'd saved money. They had interviews. Some had offers. Some just had enough. I didn't ask them to stay or go. I reminded them to send their resignations properly, to photograph their time cards, to keep pay stubs, to return equipment with receipts, and to take care of themselves. Half the staff didn't quit that morning, but by the end of the week, it was close. The phrase, "walked out with me," sounds like we locked arms and marched, but it was quieter than that. People simply chose not to come back after their last clockout. They chose dignity over a graph. The place struggled. You can't lose that many trained people and keep the wheels on. Corporate sent in a task force. They ran the floor like a pop-up clinic, triaging orders and trying not to bleed out the remaining clients. Rumors floated back to me from friends who were still there. Missed SLA after missed SLA. Penalties. The client who had pulled volume now pulling more. The boss living in conference rooms, corporate asking for explanations he couldn't give without throwing his own memos under the bus. I took a job across town at a competitor. I didn't plan on joining a competitor. I planned on sleeping for a week. But they called because industry people talk, and apparently the client from the tour mentioned my name in a meeting. The competitor asked for an interview. I told them I wasn't a magician. I said I believed in clear rules, honest schedules, and paying for the work needed to meet real demand. They liked that answer because it sounded like what they already did. I didn't recruit anyone. I didn't need to. People found their own way. Some landed where I was. Some landed in places I recommended. Some sent me messages a month later saying they were doing better. sleeping better, and felt like their work mattered again. Those messages were worth more than any title. As for my old boss, he didn't last. Corporate can tolerate a lot ugly, spreadsheets, tough months, even a mistake or two if the story improves. What they won't tolerate is a leader who writes rules that make the numbers look good today and the business fall apart tomorrow. He tried to call the walkout a coordinated attack. He tried to say we were lazy. He tried to say the market shifted. Corporate had the memo. They had the timestamps. They had the safety report. They had the client volume charts with arrows pointing down. He was gone by the end of the quarter, replaced by someone from another site who came in with the opposite approach. We fix service first. Costs follow. I heard from a friend that the new person reinstated overtime with controls, not denial. They trained the new hires properly, paid a lot of overtime at first to catch up, and then reduced it slowly as the backlog cleared and the new staffing plan stabilized. It wasn't magic. It was boring. Boring is what works. Looking back, I don't think of what we did as heroic. We didn't break anything on purpose. We didn't throw a tantrum. We followed orders so exactly that the flaws in those orders showed themselves. That's malicious compliance in a nutshell. Doing the thing you're told to do so cleanly that the person who told you faces the natural result of their own idea. There were a few moments I still replay in my head. The quiet of the dock when the shift ended and the trailer doors stayed closed. The calm in the break room when people took their full minutes for the first time in ages without guilt. The look on the client's face when they read the memo and realized we weren't just stubborn, we were bound by a rule someone else wrote. The sound of the time clock refusing to beep and the team choosing not to give their time away. Those weren't fireworks. They were small, honest acts that said, we matter. In the new job, I keep a copy of that memo tucked into a folder. Not as a trophy, as a reminder. It reminds me to write rules I'd be willing to live under. It reminds me that inside the lines only works when the lines match reality. It reminds me that when people do a little extra, it's because they feel respected, not because a boss made a speech about ownership. The best changes we made here didn't come from me. They came from listening to the floor and giving them tools and time. When a truck gets in late, we use a simple approval process that actually works. A text that logs in the scheduling system, a one-line reply that says yes or no, and a rule that if the reply doesn't come, the default is no. The difference is we answer quickly. If we say no, we own the delay. If we say yes, we pay people. People trust that. We also rebuilt breaks with fixed windows and limited flex. The rule is you can flex a break up to a set number of minutes with consent, not command, and any flex must be posted where everyone can see it. No surprises. If someone says no, that's the end of the conversation. We added cross-training in a way that doesn't leave someone stranded in a zone alone. We track safety as a priority, not a footnote. These are simple things, but simple doesn't mean easy. It means you have to pick what matters and stay with it. The old team that landed here helped set the tone. They had scars, but they also had standards. They taught the new folks the difference between rushing and moving with purpose. They kept each other honest. They didn't worship overtime. They used it like salt sparingly and on purpose. We had a few rough patches because any place with people has rough patches. We handled them like adults. We named the problem. We fixed the process. And we didn't pretend the clock was a god. The clock is a tool. Tools serve work. Work doesn't serve tools. Once in a while, I get coffee with someone who stayed behind at the old site. They say things are steadier now, but not amazing. You don't fix damage like that overnight. Some clients came back a bit, some didn't. The people who stayed are tired but hopeful because at least someone is listening to them again. I hope they keep listening. If they don't, all the lines in the world won't save them. If there's a lesson here, it isn't that overtime is good or bad. Overtime is a signal. It tells you if your plan fits reality. When the signal spikes, you can either turn down the volume and pretend the song changed, or you can hear it and adjust the plan. The boss I had chose the first path and paid for it with people, penalties, and his own job. The rest of us chose the second path, somewhere else, and we left the graphs to those who draw them for a living. I still get messages from the old crew. A receiver sent me a photo of a clean dock with a caption that said, "Home." A picker sent me a screenshot of a schedule where her break was the same every day for a month, like a little square of sanity. A forklift driver sent me a quick note. "Haven't had to run once." These aren't big things. They're the things that make a place good enough to give your time to. The day I cleared my locker, I left my steel-toe boots on the bench for a second just to look at them. They'd carried me through a lot of floors. Some were loud and friendly. Some were quiet and heavy. Those boots reminded me that people don't quit because the work is hard. They quit because the work is made harder by someone who won't see what's right in front of them. The boss tried to cut overtime costs. What he cut was the thread that held his operation together, trust. When trust goes, the extra effort goes with it. When the extra effort goes, the numbers chase it out the door. Half the staff walked out with me. Not because I'm special. Because they were done working for a memo that punished them for caring. We didn't slam doors. We didn't make a scene. We just clocked out, one by one, and took our time back to places that knew what it was worth. That's the whole story. No lawsuit, no secret recording, no miracle turnaround from a heartfelt apology. Just a boss who wrote his own downfall in plain language. And a team that complied so cleanly the truth wrote itself. We followed the lines. The lines led out the door. And on the other side, the work felt like work again. Not a fight to be treated like people. Anyway, thank you for watching. See you again tomorrow.